In quiet Maple Grove, appearances meant everything, but beneath the manicured lawns festered dangerous lies. Fake community enforcement officers, emboldened by an HOA leader's prejudice, believed a black teenager riding home was out of place and vulnerable. Exhausted from practice and heading back alone, he seemed like an easy mark. What they couldn't imagine was the strength waiting behind him at home. A father forged through decades of federal training and hardened by years of confronting real threats. When intimidation turned to physical assault, their counterfeit authority collided with authentic power, sparking a reckoning the neighborhood would never forget. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because the next story is one you don't want to miss. The sun cast long shadows across the suburban streets as Jalen pedaled his bike toward home. His muscles ached from basketball practice, but it was a good kind of pain. The rhythm of his favorite hip-hop track pulsed through his earbuds, matching the steady rotation of his bike wheels on the smooth asphalt. Sweat trickled down his neck despite the cooling air. His practice jersey clung to his back underneath his backpack, and he looked forward to a cold shower and his mom's promised lasagna for dinner. The familiar houses of his neighborhood slid past. The Martinez place with its perfectly trimmed hedges, old Mr. Johnson's weather-worn garden gnomes, the Thompsons' kids' chalk drawings decorating their driveway. Jalen rounded the corner onto his street, already tasting dinner, when he spotted them. Two men stood like a wall across the sidewalk, their stances wide and intimidating. They wore black tactical vests with community enforcement printed in bold white letters. Behind them, Lydia Whitmore stood with her arms crossed, her thin lips stretched in what might have been trying to pass for a smile, but looked more like a sneer. Jalen's stomach dropped. He slowed his bike, pulling out his earbuds as the larger of the two men, the one with close-cropped hair and a red face, held up his hand in a stop gesture. "Hold it right there," the man barked. His vest was slightly too small, straining across his chest. The name tag read, Bryce. Jalen's heart began to pound, but he kept his voice steady. "Is there a problem?" The second man, leaner with cold eyes, moved to Jalen's left. His name tag identified him as Vance. The positioning wasn't lost on Jalen. They were boxing him in. Lydia stepped forward, her wedge heels clicking on the pavement. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in the neighborhood," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Several residents have noticed an unfamiliar young man lurking around their properties." "Lurking?" Jalen's grip tightened on his handlebars. "I live here. I'm just coming home from practice." Bryce snorted. "Sure you do, kid. We're going to need to see some ID." "This is my neighborhood," Jalen repeated, heat rising in his face. "I've lived here for 3 years. Mrs. Whitmore knows that." Lydia's eyebrows arched in exaggerated surprise. "Do I? There are so many new faces these days. One can't be too careful about neighborhood security." Vance moved closer, his hand resting on something at his hip. Not quite a weapon, but the implication was clear. "The lady asked for ID. Let's see it." Jalen's mind raced. These weren't real cops. He knew that much. The vests looked cheap, like something bought online, but they were still two grown men, and the way they were positioned made his skin crawl. "I'm 16, Jalen said, forcing himself to meet Bryce's hostile stare. "I'm coming home from basketball practice at Oak Ridge High. You can see my jersey right here." He gestured to his practice uniform visible under his unzipped hoodie. "Anyone can buy a jersey," Bryce sneered. "For all we know, you stole it." The accusation hit Jalen like a slap. He thought about his father's warnings about staying calm in situations like this, about not giving anyone an excuse. But anger bubbled up in his chest anyway. "Stole it?" His voice cracked slightly. "I'm the starting point guard. Coach Riley can verify that. Or you could just ask any of our actual neighbors, since you're so concerned about neighborhood security." Lydia's face hardened. "Don't take that tone with our security team, young man. They're here to protect our community values." "Community values?" Jalen couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. "Is that what you call this?" Bryce stepped forward, closing the distance. His breath smelled of coffee and something stronger. "Listen here, smart mouth. Either you show us some ID right now, or we're going to have a real problem." Vance circled around behind Jalen's bike. Probably stolen too, he muttered, just loud enough to be heard. Jalen's pulse thundered in his ears. The bike had been a birthday present from his parents. He'd helped his dad assemble it in their garage, learning about gear ratios and brake calibration. The suggestion that he'd stolen it made his vision blur with anger. "This is harassment," Jalen said, his voice shaking slightly despite his effort to stay calm. "You're not real police officers. You can't demand my ID." Lydia's face lit up with triumphant malice. "Oh? If you have nothing to hide, why are you being so difficult? Seems suspicious to me." Bryce's hand shot out, grabbing for Jalen's arm. His meaty fingers closed around Jalen's wrist with bruising force. Lydia's voice carried the satisfaction of someone who had just won a game. "See? Caught red-handed." Jalen's heart hammered against his ribs as Bryce's grip tightened. The air felt suddenly thick and hard to breathe. His bike tilted precariously as Vance moved in closer, the two men forming a cage of tactical vests and barely contained aggression. The situation was spiraling, and Jalen could feel control slipping away like water through his fingers. "Let him go. Now!" The voice cut through the tension like a knife, calm but carrying the kind of authority that made everyone freeze. Jalen recognized his father's tone immediately. It was the same one he had used during his FBI days when confronting suspects. Terrence Carter stood at the end of their driveway in his gray jogging shorts and moisture-wicking shirt, his arms crossed over his chest. Despite his casual attire, there was nothing relaxed about his stance. His eyes scanned the scene with precise, analytical focus. Bryce's grip on Jalen's wrist loosened slightly, but he didn't let go. "This is official community business," he growled, though some of the previous confidence had leaked from his voice. "Stay out of it." Terrence took 3 measured steps forward. "Is that right?" His gaze moved deliberately from Bryce's vest to Vance's, then to their belts and boots. "Interesting choice of equipment you've got there. Those vests, Chinese knockoffs, aren't they? The stitching's already coming loose at the shoulders." Vance shifted his weight uncomfortably. Lydia stepped forward, her heels clicking against the pavement with sharp, angry taps. "Mr. Carter," she said, forcing a diplomatic smile, "these gentlemen are authorized security personnel hired by the HOA board to protect our community. Your son was being uncooperative when asked for simple identification." "Authorized by whom?" Terrence's voice remained level, but his eyes hardened. "Because I'm looking at your badges right now, and I'm seeing some serious problems. The holographic overlay is missing for one, and that font—" He shook his head. "Not even close to regulation." Bryce finally released Jalen's wrist, taking a half step back. "Listen, buddy," he started. "I'm not your buddy," Terrence cut him off. "And that radio on your belt? The antenna's solid plastic. It's a prop, probably from a costume shop." He pointed to their truck parked halfway down the block. "Just like that magnetic decal on your pickup, the one that's peeling at the corners." Jalen wheeled his bike backward, creating some distance between himself and the increasingly nervous-looking men. He'd seen his father work before during career day at school once, but this was different. This was personal. Lydia's face had gone from pink to red. "Now, see here." "No, you see here," Terrence interrupted, his voice dropping lower. "Those vests you're wearing, they're marked with community enforcement in a way that's deliberately meant to be confused with actual law enforcement. That's not just poor judgment, that's a federal offense." Vance's hand, which had been hovering near his hip, dropped to his side. The cold look in his eyes had been replaced by something closer to worry. "We were hired to do a job," Bryce protested, but his voice had lost its edge. "The HOA president hired you to intimidate residents?" Terrence took another step forward. "To harass teenage boys on their way home from basketball practice? To impersonate law enforcement officers?" Lydia's diplomatic mask cracked completely. "Now, you listen to me, Mr. Carter. I won't have you threatening our security team. The board approved this measure to protect property values and community standards." "The board approved hiring fake cops to patrol the neighborhood?" Terrence raised an eyebrow. "I'd be very interested in seeing those meeting minutes, along with the licensing and insurance documentation for your security team." Bryce and Vance exchanged glances. The swagger they had shown earlier had evaporated in the face of Terrence's methodical dismantling of their authority. "And those weapons you're carrying," Terrence continued, I'm assuming you have the proper permits, because impersonating law enforcement while armed adds some particularly serious charges to the situation." The color drained from Vance's face. Bryce's hands had started to tremble slightly. "This is ridiculous," Lydia snapped, but her voice had gone up an octave. "You can't just—" "I can," Terrence said softly, "and I will." 20 years with the FBI, Mrs. Whitmore. 15 of those in counterintelligence. I've spent my career dealing with people who think they can create their own authority. He turned his attention back to Bryce and Vance. "So, let me be very clear. Impersonating law enforcement is a federal crime. Do you really want to test me on this?" The silence that followed was deafening. The air felt electric with tension. Jalen watched as his father stood perfectly still. His presence filled the street more completely than Bryce and Vance's attempted intimidation ever had. Lydia's perfectly manicured nails dug into her palms. The two men seemed to be shrinking inside their tactical vests. The borrowed authority they had worn so confidently just moments ago now hung off them like ill-fitting clothes. The transformation was remarkable. The same men who had tried to cage Jalen in, who had accused him of theft and grabbed him, now looked like they wanted nothing more than to disappear. Their tough guy act had crumbled under the weight of real authority. Not the kind that came from fake badges and tactical gear, but the kind that came from decades of actual law enforcement experience and the absolute certainty of knowing exactly where you stand. Jalen felt his racing heart begin to slow. The fear and anger of moments ago replaced by something else. Pride, maybe, or relief, or a mixture of both. He watched his father stand there, calm and immovable in his jogging clothes, and understood that this was what real power looked like. Not intimidation, not threats, but the quiet confidence of someone who knows exactly what they're talking about and isn't afraid to stand their ground. Lydia's voice rose shrilly, echoing down the quiet suburban street. "I have the authority to keep this neighborhood safe. The board gave me full discretion to implement security measures." Movement flickered behind curtained windows as neighbors peered out at the confrontation. Doors cracked open slightly, and a few brave souls ventured onto their porches to watch. "Your authority doesn't extend to hiring thugs to harass residents," Terrence replied, his voice carrying clearly in the air. "Or did you forget that this is still America, where we have actual laws?" Bryce and Vance had taken several steps back, their bravado deflating with each passing moment. They shot dark looks at Jalen, but kept their distance now that they had been exposed. Their hands still hovered near their fake badges, as if clinging to the last shreds of their pretend authority. Mr. Hargrove emerged from his house across the street, his thin frame rigid with disapproval. "Now see here, Carter," he called out, his voice reedy with age and indignation. "Lydia's just trying to maintain standards. We've had incidents in the neighborhood lately." "Incidents?" Terrence turned slightly to face him, though he kept Bryce and Vance in his peripheral vision. Would these be the same incidents that mysteriously started happening right after we moved in? Mr. Hargrove's face flushed. "That's not what I—" "Yes, it is exactly what you meant," came another voice, strong and accented. Ms. Carmen Alvarez stepped out of her house next door, her silver hair catching the early evening light. "Let's be honest about what's happening here." Lydia's head snapped toward Ms. Alvarez. "Nobody asked for your input, Carmen." "I'm giving it anyway," Ms. Alvarez replied firmly. She walked down her driveway, her comfortable shoes scraping against the concrete. "I've watched you target the Carter family since the day they arrived. The constant complaints about their grass being a quarter-inch too high, the claims about suspicious activity when Jalen practices basketball in his own driveway. We have standards," Lydia's voice cracked with fury. "This is a respectable neighborhood." "It was respectable," Ms. Alvarez agreed, "until you started hiring fake police to intimidate children." More neighbors had emerged now, forming loose clusters on lawns and driveways. Some nodded in agreement with Ms. Alvarez, while others huddled closer to Lydia's side of the street, murmuring their support for community safety measures. Bryce cleared his throat. "Look, we don't want any trouble." "You should have thought of that before putting on those costumes," Terrence cut in. "I suggest you both leave now, and don't come back unless you want me to make some calls to actual law enforcement about your little impersonation act." The two men backed away toward their truck, trying to maintain some dignity, but clearly eager to escape. Their boots scuffed against the pavement as they retreated, the sound emphasizing the awkwardness of their departure. "This is outrageous!" Lydia's perfectly styled hair had started to come loose, matching her increasingly unraveled composure. "Mr. Hargrove, you're on the board. Tell them. Tell them about all the complaints we've received." Mr. Hargrove shifted uncomfortably. "Well, there have been concerns raised about certain elements." "Say what you really mean," Ms. Alvarez challenged him. "Because I've lived here 15 years and I never heard about certain elements until the Carters moved in." Lydia's face contorted with rage. She jabbed a manicured finger toward Terrence. "You think you're so clever with your federal agent background? You don't belong here. None of you do. This neighborhood has traditions, standards, prejudices," Ms. Alvarez interjected. "Values," Lydia shrieked. Her mask of respectability had completely slipped now, revealing the ugly truth beneath. "And I won't let you destroy them. This isn't over, Carter. Not by a long shot." Terrence regarded her calmly. "You're right about one thing, Mrs. Whitmore. This isn't over, but I don't think it's going to end the way you expect." He turned to Jalen, placing a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. "Let's go inside, son." As they walked up their driveway, Jalen glanced back. Lydia had pulled out her phone, her fingers flying over the screen. Despite her recent humiliation, a sly smile played across her lips. She looked up, caught Jalen watching, and her smile widened into something predatory. The neighbors began to disperse, some shaking their heads in disgust, others clustered in small groups trading whispered opinions. Ms. Alvarez stood in her driveway, arms crossed, watching Lydia with sharp eyes. "Thank you, Carmen," Terrence called out. She nodded. "Enough is enough. I should have spoken up sooner." Mr. Hargrove hurried back into his house, slamming his door with more force than necessary. The sound echoed through the now quiet street, punctuating the tension that still hung in the air. Bryson Vance's truck started up with a roar that seemed deliberately loud, its tires squealing slightly as they pulled away. Lydia watched them go, still smiling and tapping at her phone, as if the confrontation had merely been the opening move in a larger game. Jalen wheeled his bike up the driveway, the normality of the action feeling strange after everything that had just happened. The basketball in his backpack suddenly felt heavier, a reminder of how a simple ride home from practice had turned into something so much more complicated. The kitchen was filled with the aroma of Vanessa's lasagna, but no one was really focused on eating. Vanessa stood at the counter, her hands planted firmly on the granite surface, her nursing scrubs still on from her shift. Her dark eyes blazed with fury as Terrence finished explaining what had happened. "They put their hands on our son?" Her voice trembled. "Those fake cops actually tried to grab our boy?" Jalen pushed his food around his plate, the pasta sliding back and forth without purpose. "Mom, Dad handled it. He made them look stupid." "That's not the point." Vanessa's palms slapped against the counter. "They could have hurt you. What if your father hadn't been there? What if—" She stopped, pressing her lips together as tears threatened to spill. Terrence set down his fork. "Vanessa, sit down, please. We need to discuss this calmly." "Calmly?" She whirled to face him. "That woman hired thugs to terrorize our son. There's nothing calm about that." "Mom." Jalen's voice was soft. He had rarely seen his mother this angry, and it scared him a little. Vanessa took a deep breath and finally sat down at the table. Her hands were shaking as she reached for her water glass. "I'm sorry, baby. When I think about what could have happened." "But it didn't," Terrence said firmly. "And now we need to think strategically about our next steps." "Strategic?" Vanessa's laugh was bitter. "Like we were strategic about moving to this neighborhood, checking crime statistics, researching school districts, making sure it was safe." She made air quotes around the last word. Jalen set his fork down with a clatter. "Maybe we should just move." "No." Terrence's voice was quiet but absolute. "We're not running. That's exactly what they want." "Then what are we supposed to do?" Jalen burst out. His fear and frustration finally boiled over. "What happens next time? What if they really try to take me? What if they follow me when I'm alone or—" His voice cracked. Vanessa reached across the table and grabbed his hand. "Baby, look at me. We won't let that happen." Your mother's right, Terrence said. But we need to be smart about this. Lydia Whitmore isn't just some random racist. She's calculating. Those men today, that was a test. She wanted to see how we'd react. And how should we react? Vanessa demanded. Because right now, I want to march over there and show her exactly what happens when she threatens my child. Jalen couldn't help but smile a little at that. His mom might be a nurse dedicated to helping people, but she was also fierce when it came to protecting her family. We document everything, Terrence said. He pushed back from the table and stood up. Every incident, every interaction, every witness. We build a case. Like you used to do? Jalen asked. He had heard stories about his dad's FBI days, though Terrence rarely talked about them directly. Exactly like that. Terrence left the kitchen and returned a moment later with a leather briefcase Jalen had never seen before. He set it on the table and opened it carefully. What's all this? Vanessa leaned forward, curious despite her anger. Terrence pulled out his old FBI badge, setting it on the table with a solid thunk. The metal caught the light from overhead, still shiny despite years in storage. Next came files, neat and organized, their edges crisp. Your old case files? Jalen reached for one, but Terrence gently moved it away. Some of them. Examples of how to build evidence against people who think they're untouchable. He spread the files out. See these? Organizations that thought they were above the law, people who believed their money or connections would protect them. They were all wrong. Vanessa touched one of the files. You really think we can fight them legally? I know we can. Terrence's confidence was absolute. Lydia made a crucial mistake today. She crossed the line from harassment into criminal behavior. Those men impersonated law enforcement officers. That's federal territory. But will anyone care? Jalen asked quietly. The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of past disappointments. Ms. Alvarez cared, Terrence pointed out, and others will too. We just need to give them something solid to stand behind. Evidence, documentation, a clear pattern of behavior that can't be ignored or explained away. Vanessa straightened in her chair, some of her nursing practicality returning. I'll start keeping records of every interaction, dates, times, witnesses. Good. Terrence nodded. Jalen, I want you to carry your phone at all times. Record any confrontations, but only if you can do it safely. Your safety comes first, always. What about Lydia's phone calls? Jalen remembered her smug smile as she had tapped away at her screen. She was definitely planning something. Oh, we'll find out who she was calling, Terrence assured him. People like Lydia think they're clever, but they always leave trails. They get sloppy because they're so convinced of their own righteousness. Vanessa reached out and touched the FBI badge, her fingers tracing the edges. I haven't seen this in years, not since you retired. I never thought I'd need it again, Terrence admitted. But maybe this is why I kept it, to remind me that justice doesn't retire, even if I did. Jalen looked at the badge, the files, his parents' determined faces. The fear in his chest wasn't gone, but it felt different now, more manageable. So, we're really going to fight back? Yes, all three of them said at once, and finally they shared a genuine smile. A notice was taped prominently to their front door. Jalen's hands shook slightly as he pulled it down. The paper was thick, official-looking, with Lydia Whitmore's signature scrawled at the bottom in angry black ink. Notice of violation, it read, in bold letters. Below that were itemized complaints. Grass length exceeds regulated 2.5 inches by approximately 0.75 inches. Trash receptacles visible from street outside of designated collection times. Unapproved vehicle, bicycle stored in visible location. You've got to be kidding me, Jalen muttered. He had measured the grass himself when he mowed it 2 days ago, using the special gauge his dad had bought specifically to comply with HOA rules. And the trash cans? They were exactly where they were supposed to be, tucked against the garage wall. The screen door creaked behind him. What's that? Vanessa asked, still in her morning robe, coffee mug in hand. Jalen handed her the notice. Her face darkened as she read it, her grip tightening on the paper until it crinkled at the edges. Your father needs to see this, she said, her voice tight. He's in his office. They found Terrence already awake and working at his desk, surrounded by open files and his laptop screen glowing with what looked like property records. "Started early?" Vanessa asked, passing him the notice. "Couldn't sleep," Terrence admitted. He read the paper carefully, his expression unchanging. "Notice the timestamp? She wanted to make sure we saw it first thing." "But it's all lies," Jalen protested. "The grass isn't too long, and the trash cans—" "I know," Terrence cut him off gently. "That's not the point. This is her first official move. She's establishing a paper trail." Vanessa crossed her arms. "For what?" "To build a case that we're problem residents," Terrence explained. "She'll use these violations to justify escalating actions later." Jalen slumped against the wall. "So, what do we do?" "Document everything." Terrence stood up and grabbed his phone. "Come on." They followed him outside where he methodically photographed the lawn from multiple angles, including close-ups with a ruler showing the exact grass height. He took pictures of the trash can placement and Jalen's bike in the garage. "Time and date stamps on everything," he explained, tapping his phone. "We'll need—" The rumble of an engine made them all look up. A silver Mercedes crept past their house at walking speed, Lydia Whitmore clearly visible behind the wheel. She lifted her hand in an exaggerated wave, her smile sharp and mocking. Vanessa started forward, but Terrence caught her arm. "Wait." He raised his phone and took several clear photos of Lydia's car and her obvious surveillance of their home. She saw him doing it, and her smile faltered for just a moment before she accelerated away. "That's harassment," Vanessa said. "Plain and simple." "Yes, it is." Terrence's voice was grim. "And we're going to prove it." They went back inside, and Terrence immediately started making calls. Jalen tried to focus on his homework, but he could hear his father's voice getting increasingly tense from the other room. Finally, Terrence called them both into the living room. His face was set in hard lines. "Lydia filed a police report this morning," he said without preamble. "She's claiming Jalen was loitering suspiciously and made threatening gestures toward authorized HOA security personnel." "What?" Vanessa exploded. "Those weren't even real security guards. They were thugs she hired to intimidate our son." "I know." Terrence's calm was scary now. "I spoke to the desk officer. He said they're taking her complaint very seriously, given her position in the community." "But that's crazy!" Jalen felt his chest tighten. "You were there, Dad. You saw what really happened." "Yes, and I made sure that's in the official record." Terrence started pacing, something Jalen had never seen him do before. "But they're not interested in my statement. The officer actually suggested that maybe you should avoid certain areas of the neighborhood." Vanessa made a sound of pure outrage. "In our own neighborhood? The one we pay taxes in? The one where we own our home?" "It gets worse," Terrence continued. "Lydia's apparently been busy. She's gathered signatures from some neighbors supporting her claim that there have been suspicious youth activities in the area. She's pushing for increased security measures, including regular patrols." "By those fake cops?" Jalen asked, his voice small. "No, she's learned from that mistake. She's trying to get real off-duty officers to moonlight as security, using HOA funds, of course." Vanessa sank onto the couch. "So, she's actually gaining support? People are believing her lies?" "Some are," Terrence admitted. "Others are just afraid to stand against her, but that's not the point right now." "Then what is?" Jalen asked. Terrence stopped pacing and faced them both. His expression was cold and determined, reminding Jalen of all the stories he had heard about his father's FBI days. "The point is, this isn't harassment anymore," he said, his voice hard. "This is a war, and Lydia has no idea who she's fighting." At the police station, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Terrence stood at the front desk, his posture military straight. The desk officer barely looked up from his computer, his fingers tapping on the keyboard with deliberate slowness. "So, you're saying 2 men impersonated law enforcement officers?" The officer's tone was flat, uninterested. "That's correct," Terrence replied evenly. "They wore counterfeit badges and tactical gear marked as community enforcement. They attempted to detain my 16-year-old son." The officer finally looked up, his expression bordering on condescending. "And this was on private property? In your HOA-controlled neighborhood?" On a public street within the neighborhood, yes, but that's irrelevant to the crime of impersonating. Sir? The officer cut him off. If the HOA hired private security, they didn't, Terrence interrupted, placing photographs on the counter. These men, Bryce Thompson and Vance Matthews, have no security licenses. Their badges are fake. Their vehicle markings are magnetic decals, and they attempted to physically detain a minor. The officer glanced at the photos without picking them up. Look, Mr. Carter, I understand you're upset, but Mrs. Whitmore has already explained that this was just a misunderstanding. They're neighborhood watch volunteers who maybe got a little overzealous. Neighborhood watch volunteers don't wear tactical gear or pretend to have arrest powers. Terrence's voice was steel-edged now, and Lydia Whitmore has no authority to... Mrs. Whitmore is a respected member of this community. The officer's emphasis on Mrs. was pointed. She's worked closely with our department for years. If she says there was no criminal intent, well, he shrugged. Maybe your son just misunderstood their approach. Terrence leaned forward slightly. I was there. I witnessed it. And I spent 20 years with the FBI dealing with exactly this kind of... Then you understand how these things work, the officer cut in again. Sometimes it's better to handle community matters within the community. He pushed the photos back across the counter. I'll file your report, but I wouldn't expect much follow-up. Meanwhile, at Oak Ridge High School, Jalen sat in the cafeteria picking at his lunch. The usual buzz of conversation surrounded him, but something felt off. He kept noticing quick glances in his direction, followed by whispered conversations. Hey, a voice said quietly. It was Marcus from the basketball team. He slid into the seat across from Jalen, looking uncomfortable. You okay, man? Yeah, why wouldn't I be? Marcus glanced around before leaning in. People are talking. My mom's on the HOA board with that Whitmore lady. She came home all worked up about some emergency meeting. Jalen's stomach tightened. What kind of meeting? They're saying... Marcus lowered his voice further. They're trying to find ways to force your family out. Like, pile up so many violations and fines that you'll have to move. From 2 tables over, Jalen caught fragments of conversation. Causing trouble. Property values. Not our kind of... He stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly. Several heads turned his way, then quickly looked away. His lunch sat half-eaten, but he couldn't stomach another bite. The rest of the school day passed in a blur. Every whispered conversation felt like it was about him. Every stare seemed hostile. By the time the final bell rang, Jalen's shoulders were tight with tension. He biked home as fast as he could, taking the long way around to avoid Lydia's street. But when he pulled into his driveway, his heart sank. Another HOA notice was taped to the door. This one in a red envelope. Inside, he found his mother already home from her nursing shift, still in her scrubs. Mom! Vanessa looked up, her face tight with anger. She was holding an identical red envelope, already opened. You saw it too? What does it say? She pulled out the letter, her hands shaking slightly. Notice of non-compliant recreational equipment, she read aloud. The basketball hoop installed on your property exceeds height restrictions and creates an unsightly street view. Immediate removal is required. Failure to comply within 48 hours will result in fines of $100 per day and possible liens against the property. But we've had that hoop for months, Jalen protested. Nobody said anything before. Of course they didn't. Vanessa's voice was bitter. Because before they weren't trying to... She stopped suddenly, looking at Jalen's face. How was school today? They know, he said quietly. Everyone's talking about how the HOA wants us gone. Vanessa's face flushed with fury. She looked down at the letter in her hands, then suddenly tore it in half, then quarters, then eighths. Red paper fragments fluttered to the floor. I have had enough, she shouted, her voice cracking. That woman thinks she can bully us, threaten my child, turn our neighbors against us. She threw the pieces into the trash can with violent force. We're not taking down anything, not one single thing. Mom. Jalen had never seen his mother this angry. No, baby. She pulled him into a fierce hug. You listen to me. This is our home. We worked for it. We earned it. And no small-minded, power-hungry bigot is going to drive us out of it. She held him at arm's length, her eyes blazing. Your father may want to handle this his way, but I've got some ideas of my own. That woman has no idea who she's dealing with. Jalen trudged down the driveway to check the mail, the sun already beating down despite the early hour. As he reached for the mailbox, he heard shuffling footsteps and muttering from next door. Mr. Hargrove stood at his own mailbox, rifling through envelopes and speaking just loud enough to be heard. Causing nothing but trouble since they moved in. Property values dropping, neighborhood going downhill. Jalen's hand froze on the mailbox door, his jaw clenched. "Don't pay any attention to him, dear." The gentle voice came from behind him. Ms. Alvarez approached with her small dog on a leash, her silver hair neatly styled despite the humidity. Some people are stuck in the past, but they don't speak for everyone. Mr. Hargrove's head snapped up. He glared at Miss Alvarez, then slammed his mailbox shut and stalked back toward his house, still muttering. "Thank you," Jalen said quietly, pulling out his family's mail. More red envelopes. His stomach turned. Ms. Alvarez touched his arm gently. "You know, I taught here for 30 years before retiring. I've seen people like Lydia Whitmore come and go. They always think they can bully others into leaving, but they're the ones who end up exposed for what they are. Sometimes it feels like everyone's against us," Jalen admitted. "Not everyone, not even close." Ms. Alvarez's kind eyes hardened slightly. "Lydia's calling a community meeting tonight, trying to push through some new rules, but she's going to find out that not all of us are willing to be silent anymore." Later that evening, the community center buzzed with tension as neighbors filed in. Lydia stood at the front, perfectly coiffed in an expensive blazer, arranging papers on the podium. Her two fake security guards, Bryce and Vance, lounged near the door, trying to look intimidating. Jalen sat between his parents in the back row. He noticed Ms. Alvarez a few rows ahead, sitting straight back and alert. Mr. Hargrove huddled with a group of Lydia's supporters near the front, shooting occasional glances back at the Carters. "Thank you all for coming." Lydia's voice dripped with false warmth. "We're here to discuss some urgent changes needed to protect our community standards." Terrence quietly slipped his phone from his pocket, pressing record. "First," Lydia continued, "we need stricter enforcement of height restrictions on all outdoor equipment, basketball hoops, play structures. Anything that creates an unsightly street view must be removed." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A young mother raised her hand. "But my kids think set existing structures will be grandfathered in." Lydia cut her off smoothly. "This only applies to newer residents." Terrence's phone captured every word as Lydia outlined more targeted rules. No parking on the street between certain hours. No gatherings of more than 3 non-resident youth without prior HOA approval. Mandatory security cameras facing the street. Additionally, Lydia's smile turned predatory. "We'll be implementing a new approval process for any exterior modifications. This includes paint colors, landscaping, and security measures like cameras or lighting." Ms. Alvarez's hand shot up. "And who exactly will be on this approval committee?" "The board will select qualified residents who understand proper community standards," Lydia replied smoothly. "You mean people who will do whatever you tell them," Ms. Alvarez said sharply. Lydia's smile tightened. "I'm simply trying to protect property values and community safety. Surely we all want that." Her eyes flickered to the Carters. "Unless some people have something to hide." Vanessa started to rise, but Terrence placed a gentle hand on her arm. His phone kept recording. "These new rules will require a significant increase in enforcement," Lydia continued. "So, we'll be expanding our security team." "You mean those fake cops who tried to grab my son?" Vanessa's voice cut through the room like a whip. Lydia's face flushed. "Our community enforcement officers are volunteers who illegally impersonated law enforcement?" Terrence's calm voice carried from the back. Several heads turned. "That was a misunderstanding," Lydia snapped. "And if certain people would cooperate with security instead of causing trouble—" "What kind of trouble exactly?" Ms. Alvarez stood up. "Being black in their own neighborhood?" The room erupted in overlapping voices. Mr. Hargrove and his group shouted about property values and standards, while others protested the obvious targeting of the rules. "Order!" Lydia banged her hand on the podium. This is exactly why we need stricter enforcement. Our community is being disrupted by people who don't understand our values. Your values, Lydia, Ms. Alvarez interrupted, not ours. These rules will be implemented. Lydia's voice turned cold. The board has already approved them. This meeting is merely a courtesy notification. Really? Terrence's voice remained steady, because according to HOA bylaws, any new rules requiring additional funding need a community vote. And I'm quite certain hiring private security, fake or otherwise, isn't in the current budget. Lydia's face twisted. We have discretionary funds, which can't be used without membership approval, Ms. Alvarez added. I may be retired, but I can still read a budget. More voices joined in, questioning the rules, the costs, the obvious discrimination. Lydia's supporters grew louder, defensive. Bryce and Vance shifted uncomfortably by the door as the meeting dissolved into chaos. Through it all, Terrence's phone kept recording as Lydia's carefully constructed facade cracked, revealing more and more of her true intentions with every angry response. The sun blazed overhead as Jalen approached the community pool. He needed to cool off after his morning run, both from the heat and the stress of everything happening. His blue pool membership card felt sweaty in his palm as he walked through the gate. Mrs. Peterson, one of Lydia's friends, nudged another woman beside her. They both stared at him from their lounge chairs, whispering behind their sunglasses. A group of kids from school huddled at the far end of the pool, pointing and murmuring. Jalen lifted his chin and walked toward an empty chair. He had learned from his dad. Don't let them see you bothered. Act like you belong, because you do. Excuse me. A thin man in a polo shirt with pool manager embroidered on it stepped in front of Jalen. I need to see your membership card. Jalen held it out, the same card he had used all summer. The manager, Todd, according to his name tag, studied it like it was foreign money. I'm sorry, but this card has been revoked. What? Jalen's voice came out sharper than he intended. More heads turned their way. That's impossible. We paid our dues. Todd shifted uncomfortably. I received orders from the HOA board this morning. Your family's pool privileges have been suspended pending a review of, multiple violations. Heat crept up Jalen's neck that had nothing to do with the sun. What violations? I'm just following orders, Todd said, not meeting his eyes. You'll need to leave immediately. Mrs. Peterson and her friend weren't even trying to hide their satisfaction now. The kids at the far end had gone quiet, watching the scene unfold. This is crazy, Jalen said. You can't just... Should I call security? Todd glanced toward the parking lot where Bryce's truck sat idling, both him and Vance visible in the front seat. Jalen's stomach clenched. The fake cops were actually waiting for something like this. He looked around the pool area, at the smirking adults, the staring kids, the nervous manager. The message was clear. You're not welcome here. He backed away, trying to keep his movements calm and controlled like his father would. But inside, humiliation burned through him like acid. As he walked toward the exit, he heard one of the kids whisper, "Told you they'd get rid of him." The gate clanged shut behind him. Bryce revved his truck's engine as Jalen passed, a wordless threat. He kept walking, one foot in front of the other, until he was around the corner and out of sight. Only then did he let his shoulders slump. Only then did he feel the full weight of being treated like an outsider in his own neighborhood. Later that night, Jalen heard his father's study door close. Terrence had been in there for hours, the soft click of his keyboard the only sound. Curious and unable to sleep, Jalen padded down the hallway and knocked softly. "Come in," Terrence called. His father sat at his desk, the computer screen's glow reflecting off his glasses. Multiple windows were open, social media profiles, news articles, forum posts. "What are you working on?" Jalen asked. "Remember how I said Bryce and Vance seemed too organized to be random thugs?" Terrence's voice was tight. "I was right. They're part of something bigger." He pointed to his screen. A cached web page showed Bryce and Vance in tactical gear posed with a larger group of armed men. The banner read, Patriots Defense League, Texas Chapter. "It's a militia group," Terrence explained. They claim to be about community defense, but they're really vigilantes. They hire themselves out to handle neighborhood problems. His mouth twisted on the words. Like us? Jalen asked quietly. Like anyone they think doesn't belong. Terrence clicked through more pages. They're careful about their public image, but their private forums tell a different story. Lydia didn't just hire random security. She connected with a network of people who share her views. Jalen leaned closer, scanning the screen. Posts about protecting property values and maintaining community standards thinly veiled their real message. Look at this. Terrence pulled up financial records. The company Lydia hired for security services, it's a shell corporation, traces back to the militia's leadership. How did you find all this? A small smile crossed Terrence's face. 20 years in counterintelligence teaches you a few things. These groups think they're clever with their encrypted messages and hidden connections, but they always leave traces if you know where to look. He leaned back in his chair, studying the screen. In the blue glow, his expression hardened. Bryce Thompson and Vance Matthews. Multiple aliases. Connection to at least 3 other neighborhood enforcement incidents in the past year, all following the same pattern. Terrence's fingers moved across the keyboard, documenting everything. They think they're hunters, he said quietly, but they forgot some of us know how to hunt too. His father's voice dropped to barely a whisper as he stared at the evidence filling his screen. Now I know who you are. Jalen watched his father work, feeling a mix of pride and worry. The pool incident had been humiliating, but maybe it was pushing them toward something bigger. His dad wasn't just fighting Lydia anymore. He was unraveling an entire network of hate, hiding behind HOA rules and fake badges. Jalen dragged the heavy trash bin toward the curb. The streetlights cast long shadows across the lawn, and cicadas buzzed in the humid night air. His muscles still ached from basketball practice, but it was garbage night, and he had promised his mom he would take care of it. The wheels of the bin rattled against the concrete as he pushed it along the side of the house. A twig snapped behind him. Before he could turn, rough hands grabbed his shoulders and slammed him against the wooden fence. Hey there, troublemaker, Bryce's voice growled in his ear. The man's tactical vest pressed against Jalen's back, reeking of cigarette smoke and sweat. Vance stepped into view, blocking any escape route. Lydia says you're not getting the message. His voice was quieter than Bryce's, but just as menacing. Jalen's heart hammered in his chest. He tried to push back, but Bryce's grip was like iron. Get off me! Or what? Bryce twisted Jalen's arm behind his back. Going to cry for Daddy? You don't belong here, Vance said, moving closer. Lydia wants you gone. We can do this the easy way, or... He cracked his knuckles. Jalen remembered his father's lessons about staying calm under pressure, but fear and anger clouded his thoughts. He kicked backward, catching Bryce in the shin. Bryce cursed and yanked Jalen's arm higher. Pain shot through his shoulder. Bad move, kid. Vance's fist drove into Jalen's stomach, knocking the wind out of him. He doubled over, gasping. Not so tough now, huh? Bryce shoved him face first into the fence. Splinters dug into Jalen's cheek. Jalen struggled to breathe, to think. These men weren't just trying to scare him anymore. They wanted to hurt him, really hurt him. Help! He shouted, finding his voice. Somebody help! Vance's hand clamped over his mouth. Shut up! Jalen bit down hard on Vance's fingers. The man yelped and jerked back. Bryce spun Jalen around and slammed him against the fence again. Stars exploded behind his eyes. You little... Bryce drew back his fist. Hey! A voice rang out from across the street. What are you doing? Porch lights flicked on. Front doors opened. Miss Alvarez stood on her lawn in her bathrobe, already dialing her phone. Mr. Lau from next door rushed toward them, shouting. Bryce released Jalen, who crumpled to the ground. His vision swam as he watched the 2 men sprint toward their truck. Call the police! Someone yelled. Jalen! His mother's voice cut through the chaos. She must have heard the commotion from inside. Oh God, Jalen! He tried to push himself up, but his arm shook too much. Everything hurt. Vanessa reached him first, dropping to her knees beside him. Baby, what did they do to you? Her hands fluttered over his face, his arms, checking for injuries. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Jalen tasted blood from where his lip had split. His shoulder throbbed where Bryce had twisted it. Each breath sent sharp pains through his ribs where Vance had punched him. "I'm okay, Mom," he managed. But his voice came out weak and shaky. More neighbors gathered around them. Ms. Alvarez knelt beside Vanessa, her phone still pressed to her ear. "Police are on their way. Ambulance too." "Those men," Mr. Lau said. "They were the same ones from before. The fake security." Vanessa's arms wrapped around Jalen, gentle but protective. He could feel her trembling with rage and fear. "They could have killed him," she sobbed. "They could have killed my baby." Jalen leaned into his mother's embrace, too drained to feel embarrassed about crying in front of the neighbors. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving him cold despite the warm night. Red and blue lights flashed in the distance, getting closer. Someone had brought out a lawn chair, and Vanessa helped Jalen sit in it. His whole body ached. "Did anyone get their license plate?" a neighbor asked. "I got photos," another replied, "of them running to their truck." Jalen closed his eyes, listening to the voices around him. The same neighbors who had watched silently while Lydia harassed them were now offering help, expressing outrage. It shouldn't have taken violence to wake them up, but at least they were finally seeing the truth. Vanessa hadn't stopped crying, her tears falling onto Jalen's shoulder as she held him. He wanted to tell her he was fine, that it wasn't as bad as it looked, but he couldn't find the energy to speak. The police cars pulled up, followed by an ambulance. Its harsh lights illuminated the scene, the overturned trash bin, the scuff marks on the fence, the small spots of blood on Jalen's t-shirt, evidence of how quickly an ordinary evening had turned into a nightmare. As paramedics approached with their equipment, Jalen heard his mother whisper, "They're not getting away with this, not this time." He knew she was right. This attack had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But right now, with his body battered and his mother's tears soaking his shirt, all he could do was sit there and try to breathe through the pain, surrounded by neighbors who had finally decided to stand witness. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room cast harsh shadows across Jalen's bruised face as he sat on the examination table. The paper covering crinkled beneath him with each small movement. Vanessa hadn't let go of his hand since they arrived, her grip tightening every time he winced. Dr. Martinez gently pressed along Jalen's ribs, causing him to suck in a sharp breath. "Bruised, but not broken," she said, making notes on her tablet. "You're lucky. It could have been much worse." "Lucky?" Vanessa's voice cracked. "Those men attacked my 16-year-old son." The doctor's expression softened with sympathy. "I understand, Mrs. Carter. I'm documenting everything thoroughly for the police report. The bruising, the shoulder strain, the facial lacerations. We'll take photos, too." Terrence paced near the door, his phone pressed to his ear. His usual calm demeanor was cracking around the edges, jaw clenched as he listened to the police dispatcher. "Yes, I want to press charges," he said, voice tight with controlled anger. "2 men assaulted my teenage son. We have multiple witnesses, photos of their vehicle, and now medical evidence." He paused, listening. "No, that's not acceptable. I want to speak to a detective now." Dr. Martinez finished her examination and stepped back. "The good news is nothing's broken. The bad news is you're going to be pretty sore for a while. I'll prescribe some pain medication and anti-inflammatory drugs." Jalen nodded, too drained to speak. His split lip throbbed, and his shoulder felt like it was on fire. The hospital gown made him feel small and vulnerable. Vanessa brushed her fingers through his hair, careful to avoid the spot where his head had hit the fence. "My baby," she whispered, fresh tears welling up. "Mom, I'm okay," Jalen said, though his voice was hoarse. "Really?" The curtain rustled as Officer Harlan entered, notebook in hand. He was different from the responding officers at their house. Older, with gray at his temples and a paunch stretching his uniform. "Evening, folks," he said, his tone casual, almost bored. "Want to tell me what happened?" Terrence ended his call and turned to face the officer. "2 men, Bryce Thompson and Vance Matthews, assaulted my son on our property. We have witnesses, photos, and now medical documentation." Officer Harlan wrote something down, his pen moving lazily. And you're sure it wasn't just a misunderstanding? Boys roughhousing, maybe? Vanessa stood up so fast her chair scraped across the floor. Roughhousing? Look at my son's face. They ambushed him in the dark. Ma'am, please calm down, Harlan said, holding up a hand. I'm just trying to get all the facts. The facts? Terrence's voice was deadly quiet. The facts are that two grown men who have been harassing my family for weeks physically attacked my teenage son. The facts are that they're working with Lydia Whitmore, who's been using her HOA position to target us. The facts are that you're already trying to minimize this incident. Harlan's expression hardened. Now listen here. No, you listen. Terrence cut him off. I spent 20 years with the FBI. I know exactly what's happening here. Lydia Whitmore has friends in the department, doesn't she? That's why the desk sergeant brushed off our earlier complaints. That's why you're here trying to sweep this under the rug. The officer's face flushed red. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Carter. And assaulting a minor is a serious crime, Terrence countered. One that will be prosecuted with or without your cooperation. Dr. Martinez cleared her throat. Officer, I've documented extensive bruising consistent with an assault. My report will reflect that. Harlan's pen scratched across his notebook. I'll file the report, but without clear evidence of intent. Intent? Vanessa stepped toward him. They told him they wanted him gone. They threatened him. What more intent do you need? Witnesses heard them mention Lydia Whitmore by name, Terrence added. This was a coordinated act of intimidation. The officer sighed, closing his notebook. Look, I understand you're upset, but these things can be complicated. If you want my advice, maybe try talking to your HOA president. Work things out neighbor to neighbor. Jalen watched his father's expression change, not to anger, but to something colder, more determined. Terrence moved to stand between Officer Harlan and the examination table, his presence filling the small space. Let me be very clear, Terrence said quietly. I will build this case piece by piece. Every photo, every witness statement, every medical record. I will document the pattern of harassment, the false police reports, the misuse of HOA funds to hire unlicensed security. And when I'm done, it won't matter who Lydia knows in the department because there will be no way to ignore it. Harlan's dismissive attitude faltered slightly. Are you threatening me, Mr. Carter? I'm promising you that justice will be served with or without your help. Terrence's voice was steel. Now, are you going to take my son's statement properly, or should I call the state police? The officer looked between them, then pulled out his notebook again. Fine. Let's start from the beginning. As Harlan began taking notes, Terrence moved to Jalen's side. He placed a gentle kiss on his son's forehead, careful to avoid the bruises. They picked the wrong family, he said softly, but his voice carried the weight of an oath. Jalen leaned into his father's strength, watching Officer Harlan write. For the first time since the attack, he felt something besides pain and fear. He felt hope. His father wasn't just angry. He was focused, determined, unstoppable. Lydia and her thugs had no idea what they had started. The living room had transformed. Gone were the family photos and decorative touches that made it homey. Instead, the walls were covered with timelines, photographs, and documents held up by blue painter's tape. The coffee table disappeared under stacks of files and a laptop running multiple searches. Terrence stood in the center of it all, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he connected red strings between photos on the wall. His old FBI badge sat on the table beside him, a reminder of who he was, what he was capable of. Jalen watched from the doorway, his bruises still tender but healing. The sight of his father in full investigator mode made his chest swell with pride. This wasn't the quiet, reserved dad who read the morning paper and tended his garden. This was Special Agent Carter, the man who had spent decades taking down criminals and exposing corruption. "Come here, son," Terrence called, not looking up from the document in his hand. "Let me show you something." Jalen moved closer, studying the wall of evidence. There were photos of Bryce and Vance's truck, screenshots of social media posts, and financial documents with highlighted sections. See these bank statements? Terrence pointed to a series of numbers. Lydia's been skimming from the HOA funds for years, small amounts at first, then getting bolder. She's funneling money through a fake landscaping company. How did you get those? Jalen asked, impressed. HOA financial records are available to all homeowners. They just make it difficult to access them. Most people don't bother looking. Terrence smiled grimly. Lydia counted on that. He moved to another section of the wall where photos showed Bryce and Vance at various gatherings, men in tactical gear practicing with weapons. Your attackers belong to a local militia group, Terrence explained. They call themselves Community Defense Force. Lydia's been paying them under the table with HOA money, claiming it's for legitimate security services. Jalen felt a chill, remembering their rough hands, their hateful words. They're like, what? Want to be soldiers? Dangerous cosplayers with real guns, Terrence corrected, and Lydia's given them authority they don't legally have. That's going to come back to bite her. He pulled up a chair and gestured for Jalen to sit. Watch this, he said, typing on the laptop. Multiple windows opened, showing social media profiles, business records, and property documents. Lydia presents herself as this perfect HOA president, defender of property values, Terrence continued. But look here, 3 lawsuits from previous neighborhoods where she served on the board, all settled quietly, records sealed. Jalen leaned in, fascinated. You can find all this stuff? Knowledge is power, son. These people think they're untouchable because they control the local systems, the HOA, some cops, the neighborhood gossip network. But there's always a paper trail, always connections to be found. He pulled up another document. See this? Lydia's husband's construction company got all the HOA maintenance contracts after she became president. No competitive bidding, inflated prices, classic kickback scheme. Jalen studied the wall of evidence, seeing how it all connected. Every string, every document told part of a larger story of corruption and abuse of power. The best part? Terrence said, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. She has no idea what's coming. People like Lydia, they're so used to bullying others that they forget not everyone will back down. They forget that sometimes they pick on the wrong person. The wrong family, Jalen corrected, echoing his father's words from the hospital. Terrence squeezed his shoulder gently. That's right. We're not just fighting back. We're going to expose everything, the discrimination, the fraud, the illegal security force. By the time I'm done, Lydia won't just be removed from the HOA, she'll be facing criminal charges. Moving to another section of the wall, he pointed to a complex diagram. These are all the witnesses willing to speak up. Ms. Alvarez saw them attack you. The Bennetts have documentation of similar harassment. Even Mr. Lau, who Lydia forced to remove his cultural decorations, is ready to testify. Jalen felt a surge of hope. So, we're not alone. Never were, Terrence said. Lydia just made everyone too scared to stand together, but that's changing now. He picked up his old FBI badge, running his thumb over the worn metal. You know, when I retired, I thought I was done with investigations, done with fighting the bad guys, but some battles choose you. I'm sorry you had to come out of retirement, Jalen said softly. Terrence turned to him, eyes fierce with love and determination. Don't be. Protecting you, fighting for justice, that's not a burden. That's what fathers do, what this family does. Vanessa appeared in the doorway carrying a tray with 3 cups of coffee. She surveyed the room, taking in the evidence of her husband's methodical mind at work. Thought you could use some fuel, she said, setting the tray down. She handed Jalen his cup, more cream than coffee, just how he liked it. Terrence took his cup black. But before he could return to his work, Vanessa caught his hand. Her fingers intertwined with his, and she looked at the wall of evidence, the proof of everything their family had endured. And this, she whispered, her voice carrying all their pain, all their determination, for all of us. Ms. Alvarez's hands trembled slightly as she held her teacup, but her voice was steady and clear. She sat at the Carter's dining room table, which had been cleared of its usual items to make space for a digital recorder and notebook. "I've watched Lydia target families for years," she said, her accent growing stronger with emotion. "But what she's doing to your family, it's worse than anything before." Terrence nodded, taking careful notes. "Tell me about the community meeting last month." Lydia thought I was on her side because Ms. Alvarez's lips tightened. "Well, because I'm one of the acceptable minorities in her view. She speaks freely around me." Vanessa, sitting beside her former student's grandmother, placed a comforting hand on her arm. "Take your time, Carmen." She said, and I quote, "We need to maintain the right kind of neighborhood." Then she looked directly at your house and said, "Some people just don't understand our standards." Ochanta, Alvarez's face flushed with anger. "She was talking about your family, using that coded language she loves so much." Terrence's pen moved steadily across the page. "And the security contractors? Bryce and Vance, they started appearing after your family moved in. Lydia told everyone they were professional security consultants, but they're thugs." Ms. Alvarez's hands clenched around her cup. "I saw them following Jalen multiple times, watching your house." A soft knock at the front door made them all turn. Vanessa went to answer it, returning with Mrs. Bennett, a young mother from 3 doors down. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said nervously, "but I saw Ms. Alvarez come in, and well, I have something to share too." More neighbors arrived over the next hour. Mr. Lau brought documentation of Lydia's harassment over his Lunar New Year decorations. The Patels described how their children were suddenly uninvited from neighborhood events. Each story revealed a pattern of discrimination hidden behind HOA rules and community standards. Terrence recorded everything, his expression growing grimmer with each testimony. But it was Mrs. Bennett's revelation that made him sit up straighter. "My husband's an accountant," she said, pulling out a folder. "He noticed something odd in the HOA newsletter's financial summary. The security budget increased by 300% this year, but there's no record of a formal contract or board approval." Terrence spread the financial documents across the table. "May I keep these?" "That's why I brought them," she replied. "We're tired of being scared of her." After the neighbors left, Terrence dove into the financial records. Jalen brought him coffee, watching his father work with fascination. "Look at this," Terrence said, pointing to his laptop screen. Lydia created a shell company, Community Defense Solutions LLC, registered to a P.O. box. The HOA pays this company for security services, but the money goes straight to a personal account. "Bryce and Vance's payment?" Jalen asked. "Exactly. She's stealing HOA funds to pay her private militia." Terrence pulled up another document. "And that's just the start. Every maintenance contract, every service provider, they all connect back to either Lydia or her husband's businesses." Vanessa leaned over his shoulder, reading. "How much has she stolen?" "Conservative estimate, over $200,000 in the past 3 years. Terrence's fingers flew over the keyboard. "She's gotten sloppy lately. Probably thought no one would look closely." He opened a new window showing a series of emails. "She's been coordinating with Bryce and Vance's militia group using HOA letterhead to give them false authority. That's federal mail fraud on top of everything else." "What happens now?" Jalen asked. Terrence began compiling files into a single document. "Now we show everyone who Lydia really is." He worked through the evening organizing the evidence into a clear narrative. Financial records, witness statements, photos, social media posts, everything that proved Lydia's corruption and discrimination. "Done," he said finally, stretching his back. Vanessa and Jalen gathered around as he addressed an email to multiple recipients. The FBI's Public Corruption Unit, the State Attorney General's office, 3 local news stations, and 2 newspaper reporters known for investigating community corruption. "Once we send this," he said, "there's no going back. Lydia will know it came from us." "Good," Vanessa said firmly. "I want her to know exactly who brought her down." Jalen nodded in agreement. "Do it, Dad." Terrence's finger hovered over the mouse for a moment. Then, with a single click, he sent the evidence file flying through cyberspace toward people who could use it to bring justice. "Now we wait," he said, closing the laptop. By morning, Lydia's carefully built empire of corruption will start crumbling. Vanessa squeezed his shoulder. How long before they act on it? The media will move fastest. They love stories about corruption in suburban paradise. Terrence smiled grimly. The federal authorities will take longer, but they'll be thorough. Lydia's world is about to get very uncomfortable. Jalen looked at the wall of evidence, still covered in photos and documents. Should we take all this down now? Not yet, Terrence said. We might need it for the investigators. Plus, I want Lydia to see it when they come to interview us. I want her to understand that she never stood a chance once she decided to target this family. The community center buzzed with tension as neighbors filed in for the emergency HOA meeting. Lydia Whitmore stood at the podium, shuffling papers with practiced precision, her pearl necklace catching the fluorescent light. Her smile held the satisfaction of a predator about to pounce. Terrence and Jalen Carter arrived last, positioning themselves near the back door. Jalen's hands were sweaty, but his father's calm presence steadied him. They watched Bryce and Vance prowl the edges of the room in their fake tactical vests, trying to look intimidating. I call this emergency meeting to order, Lydia announced, tapping her gavel with theatrical authority. We have serious matters to discuss regarding certain disruptive elements in our community. Her eyes fixed on the Carters, but Terrence met her gaze evenly. Jalen noticed his father check his watch and give a slight nod. As president of this association, Lydia continued, it is my duty to maintain our standards. I have documented evidence of multiple violations, threatening behavior, and actions detrimental to property values. She pulled out a thick folder, making a show of opening it. The Carter family has repeatedly... The double doors at the front of the room burst open. 4 men and women in dark suits strode in, their FBI badges gleaming. The lead agent, a tall woman with steel-gray hair, spoke with commanding authority. Lydia Whitmore? She held up her credentials. I'm Special Agent Monica Torres, FBI Public Corruption Unit. This meeting is now suspended. The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Lydia's face drained of color, but she tried to maintain control. This is a private meeting. You have no authority. We have federal warrants, Agent Torres cut her off, nodding to her colleagues. 2 agents moved toward Bryce and Vance, who had instinctively backed toward the emergency exit. Bryce Thompson and Vance Matthews, one agent announced. You're under arrest for impersonating law enforcement officers, conspiracy to commit mail fraud, and violation of civil rights under color of law. Bryce tried to bolt, but another agent was already blocking the exit. Vance raised his hands immediately, his tough guy facade crumbling. The sound of handcuffs clicking echoed in the suddenly silent room. This is ridiculous. Lydia's voice rose to a shriek. These are legitimate security contractors. Agent Torres approached the podium, holding up a document. We have evidence that you created a fraudulent security company to funnel HOA funds to known members of a militia group, Mrs. Whitmore. We've been building this case for weeks. Camera flashes started popping from the doorway as news crews pushed into the room. Jalen recognized reporters from all 3 local stations, their microphones raised like spears. But, Lydia sputtered, looking desperately around the room. Her eyes landed on the Carters and understanding dawned. You did this. Terrence's voice carried clearly across the chaos. You targeted my son, Lydia. Did you really think I wouldn't fight back? More flashes as photographers captured Lydia's expression of pure rage. Mr. Lau stood up from his seat. Is this about the missing maintenance funds, too? Agent Torres nodded. We're investigating approximately $200,000 in misappropriated HOA fees. Anyone who has information about financial irregularities should stay to speak with our agents. Ms. Alvarez moved to stand beside the Carters, her head held high. I have documentation of discriminatory practices going back 3 years. So do we, Mrs. Bennett added, her husband nodding beside her. Lydia tried to gather her papers, but an agent stepped forward. Those documents need to stay here, Mrs. Whitmore. They're potential evidence. The news crews were having a field day, capturing every moment as Bryce and Vance were led out in handcuffs. Their tactical vests, symbols of their fake authority, looked pathetic now under the bright camera lights. Lydia Whitmore, Agent Torres said formally, You have the right to remain silent." "You can't do this," Lydia shrieked. "I know people. I'll have all your jobs." "Please, continue threatening federal officers," Torres said calmly. "It's being recorded." Jalen watched in amazement as Lydia was handcuffed, her perfectly manicured hands secured behind her designer blazer. The woman who had terrorized his family, who had made him feel unwelcome in his own neighborhood, was being led away like a common criminal. Neighbors began approaching the Carters, some apologizing for not speaking up sooner, others expressing relief that Lydia's reign was finally over. Mr. Ellison, who had always sided with Lydia, slipped quietly out the back door. "Dad," Jalen whispered, "did you know exactly when they'd come?" Terrence smiled slightly. "Agent Torres is an old colleague. Once we provided the evidence, she made sure we'd be here to see justice served." A reporter approached them, microphone extended. "Mr. Carter, can you tell us about the harassment your family endured?" Before Terrence could answer, Ms. Alvarez stepped forward. "I'll tell you everything. We all will. It's time everyone knew what really happened in our perfect little neighborhood." More neighbors gathered around, each ready to share their stories. The community center hummed with energy, but it was different now. The fear was gone, replaced by a sense of relief and solidarity. Through the windows, they could see Lydia being escorted to an FBI vehicle, her carefully crafted image of authority shattered. Bryce and Vance were already in the back of another car, their borrowed power stripped away. Cameras continued to flash, documenting every moment of Lydia Whitmore's downfall, while Agent Torres coordinated her team's collection of evidence. The HOA meeting that was supposed to be Lydia's triumph had become her final act of power and the community's first step toward healing. Lydia Whitmore's perfectly coiffed hair was starting to fray as Agent Torres spread documents across the podium. The community center's harsh lighting seemed to highlight every bead of sweat on Lydia's forehead. "We have bank statements showing systematic theft of HOA funds," Torres announced, her voice carrying across the now silent room. "Multiple shell companies, fake invoices, and direct payments to unauthorized security personnel." "Those are legitimate business expenses," Lydia protested, but her voice wavered. Agent Torres held up a thick manila folder. "We also have evidence of coordinated harassment, civil rights violations, and conspiracy to commit hate crimes. Your emails and text messages make for interesting reading, Mrs. Whitmore." The color drained from Lydia's face as Torres began reading from a printed transcript. "Get those people out of our neighborhood whatever it takes," Torres quoted. "I don't care what you have to do, just make them leave." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Bennett stood up, pointing an accusing finger. "You told me the Carters were under investigation for drug dealing. That was a lie, wasn't it?" "She told me they were running a criminal enterprise," Mr. Lau added, his face reddening with anger. "That's why she said we needed the special security patrols." Lydia's eyes darted around the room like a cornered animal. "You don't understand. Property values were at stake. I was protecting our community." "By stealing from us?" Ms. Alvarez interrupted, waving a stack of financial documents. "I've been reviewing the maintenance records. We paid for repairs that were never done." "The pool renovation funds?" someone shouted from the back. "The security cameras that were never installed?" called another voice. Lydia's perfectly manufactured facade began to crack. "Everything I did was for this neighborhood. These people," she jabbed a finger toward the Carters, "they don't belong here. They're not our kind." The room erupted in boos and shouts of disgust. Jalen watched as neighbors he had barely spoken to stood up, voicing their outrage. "I heard what you said about my family, too," Mrs. Patel called out, "about how we lowered the tone of the street." "And my rainbow flag," added Mr. Rodriguez, "the one that mysteriously vanished after you complained." Lydia's expression twisted with desperate rage. "Bryce and Vance were supposed to handle this. They promised me that they'd terrorize a 16-year-old boy." Agent Torres interjected coldly. "Your security contractors have extensive ties to known hate groups. Did you think we wouldn't discover that?" "They were recommended," Lydia shrieked. "The Heritage Association said they'd help maintain neighborhood standards." "The Heritage Association?" Torres raised an eyebrow. "Thank you for that confession. We've been investigating their activities for months." More neighbors were standing now. Years of pent-up grievances pouring out. Stories of intimidation, selective enforcement, mysterious fines, and vandalized property filled the air. Lydia's network of control was unraveling thread by thread. "The board knew nothing about this," announced Mrs. Lau, the HOA treasurer. "She forged our signatures on documents. We trusted her." Lydia's perfectly manicured hands gripped the podium. "You're all ungrateful. This was an exclusive community before what?" Terrence's calm voice cut through the chaos like a blade. He stepped forward, Jalen beside him, both standing tall. "Before families like mine moved in? Before you couldn't control who your neighbors were?" The room fell silent, all eyes on the confrontation. Lydia's mask finally shattered completely, her face contorted with hatred. "You ruined everything," she spat. "This was a perfect neighborhood until you people—" "Mrs. Whitmore," Agent Torres interrupted sharply, "I suggest you stop talking. You're only making things worse for yourself." But Lydia was beyond reason now, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. "I had every right. I was protecting our values. The board gave me authority." "The board gave you authority to manage a homeowners association," Terrence said quietly, his voice carrying across the stunned room. "Not to run a criminal enterprise, not to terrorize families, and certainly not to target my son." Jalen stood straighter beside him, no longer afraid of the woman who had tried to drive his family out. Lydia's power over him evaporated as he watched her unravel. "You don't understand." Lydia tried one last time, her voice taking on a pleading tone. "Everything I did was necessary. The neighborhood needed me to—" "To what?" Agent Torres asked. "To embezzle their money? To hire thugs? To violate their civil rights?" Two FBI agents moved to flank Lydia as she began to back away from the podium. The room had turned completely against her. Faces that once smiled at her commands now glaring with open hostility. "This is all your fault," she screamed at the Carters. "I'll sue you. I'll have you investigated. I know people in the police department." "No, Lydia," Terrence said with quiet finality. "You don't run this neighborhood anymore." The simple truth of those words seemed to break something in Lydia. She lunged forward, manicured nails extended like claws, but the FBI agents smoothly caught her arms. The handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists as she thrashed and screamed. "How dare you? Don't you know who I am? I'm the president. I'm in charge here." The neighbors, people who had lived under her thumb for years, began to applaud as the agents led her toward the door. Some even cheered. Ms. Alvarez threw her copy of the HOA rulebook, Lydia's favorite weapon, into the trash with theatrical flair. "This isn't over," Lydia shrieked as she was escorted out. "You'll see. You'll all see what happens without me." Her threats dissolved into incoherent raging as the doors swung shut behind her, cutting off the sound of her voice. In the sudden quiet, neighbors looked at each other as if seeing their community clearly for the first time. The sun cast long shadows across Maple Grove's tree-lined streets as Jalen Carter walked home from basketball practice. His bruises had faded, but the memories remained sharp and clear. This time was different, though. As he passed Mr. Lau's house, the elderly man looked up from watering his flowers and smiled warmly. "Great game last night, Jalen. That three-pointer in the fourth quarter was something else." Jalen grinned, remembering how half the neighborhood had shown up to cheer him on. "Thanks, Mr. Lau. Those roses are looking amazing." A few houses down, Mrs. Bennett waved from her driveway, where she was unloading groceries. "Jalen, honey, tell your mama I've got that recipe she asked for." The street that had once felt like hostile territory now hummed with friendly energy. Kids played freely on their front lawns, parents chatted across fences, and the fake security truck was nowhere to be seen. Even Mr. Ellison, who had once muttered darkly about troublemakers, now gave Jalen a respectful nod. Ms. Alvarez sat on her porch swing grading papers. She looked up as Jalen passed, her face brightening. "There's our neighborhood hero. Come here a minute, mijo." Jalen crossed her perfectly manicured lawn, the one Lydia had constantly cited for imaginary violations. "How are you, Ms. Alvarez?" "Much better now that we've cleaned house," she said, patting the swing beside her. The interim HOA board met yesterday. We're rewriting all the bylaws to prevent another Lydia from ever taking power. That's great, Jalen said, settling next to his former teacher. Dad's been helping with that, right? Your father is a godsend. Ms. Alvarez nodded. He's helping us set up proper oversight and transparency rules. But you know what makes me happiest? She gestured at the street. Look at everyone. Really look. Jalen observed the scene before him. The Rodriguez kids were playing basketball with the Patel twins. Mrs. Bennett was now sharing her groceries with Mr. Lau, laughing about something. 2 new families were moving in down the block, and neighbors were already bringing welcome baskets. This is what community looks like, Ms. Alvarez said softly. Not Lydia's version of perfect lawns and perfect people, but real neighbors looking out for each other. It feels different, Jalen admitted, like we can breathe better. That's because we finally stood up to the bully, Ms. Alvarez squeezed his shoulder. And you, young man, showed us how. Jalen felt his cheeks warm at the praise. I was scared, though, when those guys cornered me. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared, Ms. Alvarez said firmly. It means you faced the fear anyway. That's what you and your family did. Further down the street, Jalen could see his parents sitting on their own porch. His mother was still in her nursing scrubs, looking tired but content as she leaned against his father. They watched the neighborhood with quiet satisfaction, like guardians who had helped restore peace to their domain. I should head home, Jalen said, standing up. Mom's probably got dinner ready. Go on then, Miss Alvarez smiled. But remember, you're always welcome here. As Jalen walked the final stretch home, he remembered how different the same path had felt just before. The fear, the anger, the feeling of being an outsider in his own neighborhood. Now each step felt like a victory. His parents straightened up as he approached, their faces glowing with pride. Vanessa held out her arms for a hug, and Jalen gladly accepted it, no longer worried about looking uncool in front of the neighbors. Good practice? Terrence asked, his deep voice carrying the same calm strength that had faced down Lydia's threats. Yeah, Jalen settled into the porch chair between them. Coach says I might make team captain next season. Of course you will. Vanessa squeezed his hand. You're a natural leader, baby. Just like your father. Jalen looked out at their street, now peaceful in the gathering dusk. Porch lights were starting to come on, creating a warm, welcoming glow. The basketball hoop that Lydia had tried to have removed stood proudly in their driveway. A symbol of defiance turned into victory. You know what I realized? Jalen said thoughtfully. We didn't just survive what they threw at us. We changed everything. The whole neighborhood is different now. That's because you showed people they had a choice, Terrence replied. Sometimes folks go along with wrong things because they're scared to stand up. But when someone takes that first step, others find their courage too, Vanessa finished. Like Ms. Alvarez, and then the louse, even old Mr. Ellison came around. The evening air was sweet with the scent of blooming jasmine from the vine Lydia had once ordered them to remove. Now it climbed freely up their porch trellis, its white flowers glowing in the twilight. A group of kids rode past on bikes, calling out cheerful greetings. The sound of their laughter echoed down the street, no longer hushed by Lydia's arbitrary rules about noise pollution. Somewhere nearby, music played softly from a backyard gathering. This feels like home now, Jalen said quietly. Really feels like it. Vanessa wrapped an arm around his shoulders, and Terrence's strong hand clasped his knee. They sat together as the stars began to appear. A family that had faced darkness and emerged stronger. The porch light cast a gentle glow around them, and for the first time since moving to Maple Grove, they felt completely at peace. The neighborhood had transformed from a battlefield into a sanctuary, not because they had run from the fight, but because they had stayed and won it together. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.